Okay, welcome back, class. We are now moving on into the aggregates, what they call aggregate demand, aggregate supply, aggregate expenditure. Basically, when you see the word aggregate, it means all summed together. Now, before we've been talking about supply and demand, and typically we were looking at the consumer, perhaps their demand for tires or sweaters or so on and so forth, and the suppliers of those tires or sweaters. Now we're looking at the demand from all sectors. We're looking at the demand for everything, and they call it aggregate demand. And we're looking at the supply from all areas. So we're no longer looking at just the price of a tire, or the price of a sweater, or the quantity of sweaters or the quantity of tires. We're looking at the entire price level of everything. So they call it the aggregate price level. And in terms of quantity, we're not looking at quantity, again, of tires or sweaters, but we're looking at the quantity of everything. So that would be real GDP. So we say, first of all, we start with aggregate demand, okay? That, again, it's the demand, total demand for all final goods and services from all sectors, okay? It looks like what our term for GDP was. Aggregate demand, AD, is equal to, it comes from all sectors. Consumer spending, investment spending, something for future, for future production. Government spending, and the international portion of it, exports minus imports, or what they call net exports. Right. Aggregate demand is what they call the demand side of the economy, okay? And we'll also be looking at aggregate supply. Now that's the total sum of all final goods and services that are supplied in an economy. Now remember, in this case, we're not looking at just one curve. When we talk about aggregates, we're looking at the short run and the long run for supply. So we end up with two supply curves. We have a long run aggregate supply and a short run aggregate supply. Okay? So oddly enough, a short run aggregate supply is SRAS and the long run aggregate supply is LRAS. Okay? Now this is what would be referred to as the production or the supply side of our economy. And let me stress, we need both. You can't just go out and say, oh, you're a supply sider or you're a demand sider. An economy needs both sides, okay? So let's be clear about that. All right, so we'll start with aggregate demand. There are a lot of similarities between aggregate demand and regular demand. Aggregate demand also has a negative slope, slopes downward, okay? It slopes downward for basically three reasons. First one is the wealth effect. So in general, if things are just getting, you wake up tomorrow, things are a lot more expensive. You end this video, you go out to the store and everything's 20-25% more. Well, how do you feel? Well, you feel poorer, okay? So typically you feel poorer, you're going to end up consuming less. Unless, of course, you're one of my daughters or sons. Notwithstanding, the wealth effect means as the aggregate price level is going up, overall demand is going to be cut back. So that's one of the factors of the negative slope of the aggregate supply. Also, there is an interest rate effect. Now remember, and we're going to be getting into this more and more later on when we start talking about money and monetary policy. Remember we said interest rates, that is the price of money, okay? And in this area we see, well, interest rates. Okay, so the price, if the price of money is going up, that impacts the aggregate price levels. again, the y-axis is not just the price of one item or two items, it's the price of everything. So this y-axis we call the aggregate price level. And again, the x-axis is not a quantity of one particular item or good, it is the quantity of everything. So that is real GDP. And if the price of money goes up, well, that's part of the aggregate price level, and it just makes sense when you think about it. You're going into Target and you're going shopping. If the bank calls you and says, "Hey, guess what? We're going to give you a new introductory rate on your charge card. It's not going to be 18% anymore. It's going to go down to 0% for the next 6 months." Well, typically you're going to end up, buying more. Same thing with businesses. If the interest rate goes down, for instance, a lot of projects that the businesses had, on the table now become profitable, and they will engage in those projects. It happened to us many years ago when we were making precision parts for the Defense Department and for the Big Three. You'd be looking at a project of whether or not you're going to invest in an expansion of the building or even a new equipment, and you're thinking about, well, what is the return going to be? Well, if the interest rate, the price of money goes down, you'll be more than likely to invest in more. So if the aggregate price level went down, which is affected by the interest rate, generally more is going to be consumed, and businesses are going to invest in more. So we have this inverse relationship, again, between aggregate price level and real GDP. The third one is the international trade effect, okay? So we've got, we're in the global economy. If the price of our products, let's say the price of our products start going up. Well, it just, again, it's kind of common sense. If the price of our products is going up, foreign folks and people from other countries typically are going to buy less of our products, all right? So that would be the international trade effect. Those three are what give the negative slope to the aggregate demand curve. Now, again, just like with the regular demand curve, we can have movements along a demand curve. In other words, we can slide up and down this aggregate demand curve because of changes in the aggregate price level, or we can have an entire shift of the curve, meaning the aggregate demand can shift to the right, or aggregate demand can shift to the left. And again, rule of thumb, if it's shifting to the right, in general, it's more. It's shifting to the left, it's less. Now, we have different factors, but again, not the price level. Different things can happen that will shift this aggregate demand curve. And it breaks down, and again, what we do is we basically break it down into the four sectors that we just mentioned: consumers, investors, government policy, and international trade. Something happened in one of these or more of these areas that caused the aggregate demand curve to shift to the right or shift to the left. And again, just think, is it causing it to be more or less? And for consumers, it would be a change in your real wealth. If your real wealth did increase quite a bit, all right, well, typically you're going to end up, feeling better about things, and you're going to, in general, purchase more. All right. Expectations. That's a very powerful one. Milton Friedman said expectations are extremely powerful, and that's right. It's something like a self-fulfilling prophecy. You feel good about things. If consumers are feeling good about the way the economy is going, chances are you're more likely to go out and spend money, whether it's a durable or a non-durable good. You're going to purchase more, okay? And the reverse, remember, this is economics, so the reverse can happen. If our expectations are, boy, things are bad and they're going to get worse, everybody tightens up and cuts back on their spending, shifting this to the left. Also, taxes. Taxes are pretty straightforward. The government taxes you or I. We have less money. It doesn't take a genius to figure out if we have less money, we are going to spend less. Or if there's a cut in taxes and we have more money, we're going to spend more. All right? Second area would be the investors. Very close to expectation, it's investor confidence. How do the investors feel? And that will shift aggregate demand to the right or to the left. And again, interest rates, which you just mentioned. If the interest rates are higher or lower, that's going to cause a change in investments, and it's going to shift aggregate demand to the right or to the left. And finally, the quantity of money, okay? Now, more money in general, a rule of thumb, more money out there tends to expand the economy, at least in the short run. I know there's a debate on does the increase of money really expand the economy. Well, at least in the short run, yes, it will. Okay, and if there is more money out there, interest rates are going to tend to go down, and it's very basic. It could be anything. If you have a lot of something, all right, and you're getting even more of it, it doesn't matter what it is, apples, watermelons, or money, the value to you goes down a bit if you've got a lot of it and you're getting even more. However, when that item becomes more and more scarce to you, its value to you increases. And it's the same thing with money. As the quantity of money gets smaller or tighter, the value to you, its price, interest, will go up. Okay? So that will affect the aggregate demand as well. Third, government policy. Now we're going to be going into very soon government budgets and government fiscal policy and monetary policy. Government policy, fiscal and monetary policy can either be what they call expansionary, grow the economy, or it can cool down an overheated economy. Typically, when we think of government policy, though, it is trying to encourage an economy to grow, all right? Although it could be used, government fiscal and monetary policy could be used if the economy was overheating and the government thought that, things are starting to get a little out of hand, we better, contract this economy a bit, all right? And then the international trade, that would be two parts. Foreign income. Well, just think, in general, if we're doing just all right, but let's say other countries are doing really, really, really well, all right? If other countries are doing really well, that's great, but there's going to be a spillover effect onto our country. More goods are going to be purchased in this country as well, okay? And again, the reverse can also be true. Then the exchange rates. That's the price of one country's currency in relationship to another country's currency. And if our currency, if our dollar gets stronger, what does that mean? Well, it means we can, buy more stuff overseas. For instance, between the U.S. and Canada, we have that floating exchange rate. Typically, for a long, long time, when I was about your age or a little younger, actually, we were getting a little bit more. The dollar was fairly strong. It was $1 to about $1.10. $1 U.S. got you about $1.10 Canadian. In the 80s, it was really a good deal. It went up to, we were getting $1.30, $1.35 Canadian for our dollar. It was stronger. What does that mean? Well, when your dollar is strong, it's great if you and I are going over to Canada to buy things because it is, in a sense, less expensive. However, if you and I have a business and we are exporting products, our products are going to be more expensive, okay? So I know it sounds good to have a strong dollar. And when I was growing up, I always, even before I took economics, I just would hear it and I would think, gee, that sounds good, a strong dollar. Well, if you are an exporter, you don't want to see a strong dollar. That's why China has been doing everything that they can to keep their money very weak. They keep their money very weak so that their exports will be cheaper, okay? All right. So that takes care of aggregate demand. Then we talk about aggregate supply. Now that, again, that is the production side of the economy. Now, when we look at the relationship in a firm, what is, and I know this is more of a micro issue, a firm uses inputs to produce output, okay? Now, inputs affect the firm's cost, things that are coming in affect the firm's cost, and output naturally would affect a firm's revenue, okay? And we're going to need to remember that because when we start talking about shifts and what a firm can do, we're going to need to remember this. And the number one input for all firms is labor, okay? As Adam Smith said back in 1776, it's the wealth of nations. Labor productivity is the wealth of nations. And labor is the key input for business, all right? And so that's something we're going to need to remember. And it goes to what we just said about government and taxes. If the government's taking more money away from us in taxes, well, we have less money to spend. We're going to buy less. Same thing with business. If their input costs are going up, they're going to make less. If their input costs go down, they're going to make more, okay? I know it sounds pretty simplistic, but, that's the way we should look at it, okay? And the number one input is labor. All right, but let's take a look now at the long run. The long run is kind of an interesting idea. Here in the long run, when we talk about long run and short run in economics, we're not really talking about 6 months or a year or a time frame. We are talking about a change in costs or prices. In the long run, what we say is everything is variable. Everything can be changed in the long run. All prices can be changed in the long run, okay? Kind of a nice idea, okay? In the short run, it's a period where some prices or costs cannot be or have not been changed, okay? What John Maynard Keynes liked to have said was wages are sticky. They take a while to change. In a lot of economic books, they would talk about if you had, for instance, a little pizza restaurant, what could you, well, there's some things you just absolutely couldn't change. And let's say you had a very expensive brick pizza oven, okay, and you were making payments to Bank of America. Well, you couldn't change those. That would be a cost that you couldn't change, okay? Let's say you had the mortgage on your little operation, on your building. That would also be a cost you couldn't change, all right? So that's short run. Now, in the short run, there are some variable costs. You could change the amount of hours or people that you've got working for you. You can change the amount of ingredients that you're buying, those kind of inputs that you're buying. You can change the number of napkins that you're buying. There's a lot of variable costs. But there are some costs that you just can't change. That is known as the short run, okay? However, in the long run, I know sometimes it's tough to get this idea. In the long run, all costs are variable. Everything can be changed in the long run, okay? That's the key difference. So when we start looking at, because we're going to have two different curves, in the long run, if all of you in the class were, let's say you were the heads of, you represented every major industry in the United States. You covered the entire United States. And I came to each one of you and I said, all right, just tell me, if you could have anything you wanted, you could have anything and change anything in your operation. You can expand here, expand there, build a plant up north, build 3 plants out west or down south. You can do anything you want. Everything's variable. Okay? Think of that scenario. And then if I went to each one of you and I said, okay, you know, one of you is the head of U.S. Steel, one is the head of Alcoa, one represents all the electrical manufacturers, one is, has to do with, one of you represents the railroads, but you cover the entire scope of products for the U.S. Now, you thought about it and you say, okay, I can have anything I want. And I come to each one of you and I say, okay, now that you can have anything you want, with that in mind, how much stuff, a dollar amount, how much monetized, how much stuff could you make with the thought of that you get anything you want? And I go to each one of you and, you know, somebody says, oh, I could do $200 billion worth of product. One says I can do 150 billion. One says, oh, I can do $750 billion. And all I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, and I'm just adding it up. All right? I'm not asking any other questions. You got everything you wanted, everything was variable, okay? But then you told me what you could produce. And when I finally tallied it up, let's say it comes to $30 trillion. I'll say, all right, well, this is what our long run aggregate supply curve is going to look like, given everything is variable. And it's going to look like just a straight line, a vertical line going right down to $30 trillion. Okay, because everything was variable. We weren't looking at over here at the aggregate price level. We were just looking at if everything, you could have anything you wanted, what could we make? So we say, okay, it's $30 trillion, and we call that our potential output. All right? So that's what the LRAS looks like, the long run aggregate supply curve. Now, can this curve move? Yes, it can. Okay? Basically, 3 influences on the long run aggregate supply curve. And again, moving to the right means something good happened. There's more being made. Moving to the left, obviously something bad. All right. Number 1 would be resources. Now, a lot of times when we think of that, we think of something negative, okay? For instance, it would be a huge disaster, and it would have to be an absolutely huge disaster. We're not talking about a little storm in Miami or something. We're talking about some huge disaster that, you know, wipes out industry all along the East Coast. All right, something major, some major event like that would cause long-run aggregate supply to shift to the left. But again, something positive could happen also and have it shift to the right. When they discovered the New World, they had no idea the resources that they had discovered. They had no idea that the United States, you know, with the wealth of the land, you know, how much it could produce. Okay? Number 2 is technology. Generally, technology, and again, remember, it's the wisdom we use to make capital more productive or to actually come up with new types of capital to be more productive. Right? Generally speaking, that is going to shift long-run aggregate supply to the right. The internet would probably be a good example because there was a technology that pretty much made all businesses more productive. It wasn't just one item for, let's say, the motorcycle industry, okay? The internet made all businesses more productive. So that would shift long-run aggregate supply to the right, okay? And the third one is institutions, and we talked about that the other last time. Institutions, they can foster, clear across the board growth. They can, the free market as opposed to communism can definitely increase output, clear across the board. And again, we could go reverse in the other direction. We go from a free market to a totally communist style government. Long-run aggregate supply is going to shift to the left. Okay. All right. So that's our first board. Got a number of boards today, and hopefully I can get all these in two videos. I got these sheets are a little easier to put up and down, so bear with me. All right. So now we're looking at short-run aggregate supply, and again, short-run aggregate supply looks like our good old regular supply curve. Okay, it has a positive slope, and there's a lot of similarities between the short-run aggregate supply and regular supply. Again, though, this is the supply of everything. So we've got aggregate price level and real GDP. Okay? Now, the short-run aggregate supply slopes upward because sticky input costs. What does that mean? Well, what they like to say is when things are changing, if the prices are going up, wages, let's say, have a tendency to lag. They're somewhat sticky. They don't change immediately. Okay, they take time for them to change. All right, but if your inputs are if the prices are going up and your input costs are the same as a business, you're not real upset about that. So you're going to tend to make more. Okay, that's one of the factors that causes the positive or the upward slope of the short-run aggregate supply curve. Menu costs, okay, again, hesitant to, when we're changing these prices, we have to see what is happening. Do we want to go and start changing over the prices that we're charging? That remains to be seen. When the aggregate price level is going up, what is happening there? Menu costs are going to cause the short-run aggregate supply curve to shift upward. Okay, money illusion. Okay, same thing. Remember, money illusion was when you think the nominal wage or the nominal rate is the real rate. Okay, if prices are going up, or prices, let's say, are going down, and your wages are stuck higher at a higher level, and they don't get unstuck quickly, in general you're going to be producing less. Okay, even though eventually the wages do get unstuck. Okay. Now, there are shifts also of short-run aggregate supply. Number one would be finally, when the input costs finally change, okay? And that will shift us either to the right or to the left. Expectations, again, as we talked about, very powerful. How do suppliers, think things are going to, happen in the future, all right? And again, you can go one way or the other. Now, and then what they call supply shocks, okay? Normally, if you took economics in high school, when they talk about supply shocks, generally those were negative, okay? If something god-awful happened, supply shock, we had a couple of big ones in the 1970s when OPEC did a double a barrel shotgun approach to us and raised the price of oil twice in a major way in the 70s, that would be considered a supply shock, okay? And that would shift it to the left. Now, a few years ago, when they started the vertical drilling and fracking, and we're not arguing the good or the bad of it, we're just saying, you know, they did introduce fracking. It produced a lot more oil for us. In fact, for a while there, I know it's hard to imagine, I just got gas this morning, and holy smokes, the price was unbelievable, but a few years ago we were actually energy independent, and I hope to God we can get back there very, very soon. Of course, if you're like my son-in-laws, they have electric cars, so they're not all that worried about the price of gas. All right, so anyway, let's put them all together, and what do we end up with? Well, we have our aggregate demand, which is this. We have our short-run aggregate supply here, and here we have long-run aggregate supply coming right down the middle, okay? So in this scenario, we would say, okay, here we are in long-run and short-run equilibrium, okay? Both long-run and short-run equilibrium, all right? But you've got to remember, you know, these curves can shift, and again, even if it was a natural disaster, or when we, and I don't want to give you too much all at once, but when we look at the Great Recession, and we had a huge change in the financial institutions, that can cause the long-run aggregate supply curve to shift as well. So we're looking at it right now. Everything looks great. We're in long-run and short-run equilibrium. But we know in real life, this is economics, and in real life, things probably, most probably, are not going to stay like that, you know, for definitely not forever, okay? It's like when I would come home at night when I had all 9 of my children at home. Thank God they're all grown and married and have their own homes now, but when I would come home and all 9 of them, and the whole house was quiet, it was fantastic. It was long-run and short-run equilibrium. But I knew that in a few minutes somebody's going to be killing someone, and pandemonium was going to break loose, and it typically always did. So this is great, but we know in real life it doesn't stay like that. Okay? So let's go on to the next board. And by the way, I finished up, I know we had to give that extra week, but I did finish up the exams, and I think I might have 1 or 2 more to go, and everybody's doing is doing pretty darn well. Pretty darn well. Let's keep it up, and we're going to have a great semester. Okay, so here again, here's the big blow up of long run and short run equilibrium. What we're going to talk about now is we're going to go into what they call a recessionary gap and an inflationary gap. And we're going to say, well, now the government can take action either through fiscal policy or monetary policy to fix both of these conditions. Or we can see what will happen when one of these conditions occurs, what would generally happen in an economy, okay? So here we're looking at, we got our potential output at $30 trillion, okay? Again, we are considered to be at full employment here, and even though at full employment, it doesn't mean everybody's working, unfortunately. It means we're still going to have probably about a good 5%. Again, depending on the economics book and conditions, because lately that number seems to have gone. A few years ago, it was tending to look as though it was going to be approaching 6%. And then a lot of books were referring to it at around 5. Some numbers recently are saying it's around 4%. Doesn't matter. The long and the short of it is, it's made up of frictional and structural unemployment, and we always will have it in an economy, and we have it even at full employment, even at our potential output. Okay, all right. Well, let's get into this recessionary and inflationary gap. All right, this is it. This is the recessionary gap and the inflationary gap. I hope we can see that all right. I hope this works out for you folks. I hope everything is legible. All right, so let's look at what they call a recessionary gap. So we were at this point right here. We are in short run and long run equilibrium, okay? But something happened. One of those events that we just talked about happened, and aggregate demand shifted to the left, okay? And it does. So shifts to the left. So what does that mean? Well, if we're no longer on this aggregate demand curve, but it shifts to this one, it means we're here, okay? So what you would say is, well, okay, we are in short run equilibrium here, but we're not in long run equilibrium anymore. We're to the left, okay? So what does that happen? Well, simply we look down and say, well, okay, where are we in terms of real GDP? Well, if we were at 30 trillion at our potential, but because this shifted over to here, we bring it down, we say, well, now we're at 28 trillion. So again, it doesn't take an economic genius to figure out that, business has slowed down. We are in a recession, all right? And because there's a gap between this point, and we are in a recession, they call it a recessionary gap, all right? Now, in this recessionary gap, what is happening? Well, as we talked about, business has slowed down. But again, remember, wages are sticky. They take a while to adjust. Now, since we are in a recession, the wages are going to be adjusting, but just think of it, if we're in a recession, the wages are going to be adjusting downward. But it takes a while for that to happen, all right? So that's the period of this recession. But eventually they do come down. They do adjust. And again, labor input. Labor is the most important input of business. So when the labor input goes down, in general, businesses, you can make more. When your key input has gone down in cost to you, you can make more. And you do. So we are on, if we can see this, we were here at the very beginning, long run, short run equilibrium. Aggregate demand shifted to the left. Let me do it this way. Aggregate demand shifted to the left. So we moved from our original point to the point here, which is that point. Okay, that's the second point. We're in short run equilibrium, but we're not in the long run. But what happens at this point? Finally, the wages come down and adjust. Now, short run aggregate supply, which was here, now it can make more. So again, more is a shift to the right. So our short run aggregate supply curve shifts to the right, and it's no longer here, it's at this point. So what we have done basically is we went from this point, number one, to this point, number two, then finally when the wages came down and shifted short run aggregate supply to the right, we ended up here. Now again, here we are back to long run and short run equilibrium. Although, as you can see, we are at an aggregate price level that's quite a bit lower than the point that we started at. Okay? Now, before all this happened, could the government have stepped in and done something to shift aggregate demand? Yeah, that is not impossible. As a matter of fact, that is what John Maynard Keynes was stressing during the Great Depression. We need to increase aggregate demand. All right? The problem was they didn't have macroeconomics back in 1929, and all the things that President Hoover did, it wasn't that he didn't care about the country or the people. He did. He tried to do a lot of things. The problem was the key things that he did just made matters worse. And so what should have been a severe recession drove us into the Great Depression, and we didn't get out of it until World War II. But we're going to talk about that. We may get to the Great Depression, the Great Recession in today's videos, but might have to wait till next week on that. All right, so that's a recessionary gap, and you are more than likely going to be quizzed on it. So what we did went from 1 to 2 to 3, okay, and we ended up at a lower aggregate price level. Now on this scenario, we have an inflationary gap. This would be if, let's say, somebody said to you, "Gee whiz, can you work a 12-hour shift today?" And you say, or this week, and you say, "Oh, all right, I can do that." And someone comes to us, and we're all working a 12-hour shift, okay? And then things are heating up. The economy is really heating up, and they come to us and say, "We really need you. Can you work a 14-hour shift?" And you're all young, good, hardworking students, and you say, "Yes, we'll do it." So you're working a 14-hour shift, all right? And you do it for 1 week, and you do it for 2 weeks. But holy smokes, you haven't seen your family or friends in quite a while. You're only getting about 4 hours of sleep. Can you sustain this? Can you keep this up in the longer run? And the answer is well, no. But here's what's happened, because a lot of students will always say, "Well, wait a minute, how can we be beyond our potential output?" And that's a good question. It has to do with the economy is really overheating, and just think of it as, folks are working 12 and 14-hour shifts. So what that has done now, something, had caused aggregate demand to shift to the right. That was our starting point. We started at the same point as the recessionary gap right here, but something caused aggregate demand to shift to the right, okay? That's why we're all working these 12 and 14-hour shifts, all right? Now, we are beyond what we call our potential output, okay? But, so we're to the right of our long-run aggregate supply, and guess what? Prices, our wages are going to begin to go up, okay? And since we are to the right of our original starting point, we have this gap, and what's going to happen is, higher prices are going to occur, so inflation. So we have a gap and inflation, so we call this an inflationary gap. But here's the thing to remember. We are working those 12-hour, 14-hour shifts, all right? So we went from this point out to this point, all right? But can we sustain that? No, eventually. Now the wages are eventually going to become unstuck, all right? But again, it takes time for them to become unstuck. So what's happened is aggregate, I pointed to that point earlier. We were starting here and aggregate demand shifted to the right, bringing us up to this point, okay? Can we sustain it? No, we can't. You can't keep working those 14-hour shifts, all right? And what's happened? So wages finally get unstuck. And what happens is they go up, all right? Now, again, wages are the key input for businesses, and what happens is when your key input goes up in cost, again, you're not going to make more, you're going to make less. That will end up shifting this short-run aggregate supply curve over to the left. So basically what we're doing is we have that 1, 2, 3. We started here at 1. Aggregate demand shifted over, bringing us to be in short-run equilibrium, but not short and long-run equilibrium. Everybody's working like mad, but you know, can we sustain it? Can we keep working a 14-hour shift? No, and wages finally start going up. Once the wages start really going up, this short-run aggregate supply curve is finally going to shift back to the left because, you know, businesses are making less. And it does. So what happens is we go from 1 to 2, which is our inflationary gap, but then with labor input going up, less is going to be made, and it's going to eventually shift short-run aggregate supply back to the left to 3. So we go from 1 to 2 to 3. Just somewhat the opposite of what we just talked about. Now, 1 to 2 to 3, and now here, yeah, we are back at long and short-run equilibrium, but as you probably guessed, we are at a higher aggregate price level. Okay? All right, so that takes care of those items. I think I'm going to pause the video and put it on another one. Otherwise, it takes too long for it to load. Stay with me.